The morning light filtered through the blinds of my small apartment in Seattle as I sipped my coffee, mentally preparing for another day at Tech Vision Solutions. Rain tapped gently against my window. Typical Pacific Northwest weather that had become the soundtrack to my life since moving here 3 years ago. I glanced at my watch. 7:15 a.m. I had plenty of time before my 9 a.m. start, but experience had taught me to arrive early. Not because I was particularly enthusiastic about my job as a junior software developer, but because David Winters, my manager, had a habit of noticing who was at their desk before the official start time. "Early bird gets the promotion," he'd say with that smirk that made my skin crawl. My phone buzzed with a text from my colleague Priya. "Heads up, David's on a warpath about the Henderson project deadline." Great. Just what I needed. I finished my coffee, grabbed my laptop bag, and headed out. The bus ride to downtown Seattle took 20 minutes, during which I reviewed the code I'd been working on for the past week. While the rest of the team had been manually inputting and processing data for the Henderson account, I'd been quietly developing a script that could automate most of this tedious work. No one knew about it yet. Not even Priya, who was the closest thing I had to a friend at TechVision. I wasn't being secretive intentionally, I just didn't think it was anything special. Just a little side project to make my own work more efficient. When I arrived at the office, the tension was palpable. Several of my colleagues already looked stressed, their faces illuminated by their screens as they frantically worked. David was pacing back and forth near the conference room, checking his watch every few minutes. "Good morning," I said, sliding into my desk. "Morning, Amber," Priya whispered from the adjacent cubicle. "It's going to be a long day. Henderson wants the quarterly report by tomorrow, not next week. David's freaking out." I nodded, logging into my computer. "How much more data processing do we have left?" "Hours worth, maybe all night." Priya sighed, dark circles already visible under her eyes. "David's already told everyone to cancel evening plans." Before I could respond, David's voice boomed across the office. "Team meeting in 5 minutes." The conference room filled quickly, anxiety hanging heavy in the air. David stood at the head of the table, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, contrasting with his disheveled hair and reddened face. "As you all know, Henderson has moved up their deadline. They need the complete data analysis and quarterly report by tomorrow morning." His eyes scanned the room. "That means all of you will be staying until the job is done. No exceptions." My stomach dropped. I had tickets to a concert I'd been looking forward to for months. Not that I could mention that now. "But sir," one of the newer team members ventured, "we still have thousands of entries to process manually. Even with all of us working, it could take until dawn." David's expression hardened. "Then you'll work until dawn. This client represents 30% of our annual revenue. I don't care what it takes. We deliver on time." As the meeting dispersed, I returned to my desk, thinking about my script. It wasn't finished yet, but maybe it could help. I opened my development environment and started refining it while simultaneously working on my assigned portion of the Henderson data. Hours passed. Lunchtime came and went, most of us eating at our desks. By 5 p.m., the regular end of our workday, nobody had made a move to leave. By 7 p.m., the office had ordered pizza, a transparent bribe to keep morale up during the forced overtime. "How's it coming along?" David stopped by my desk, pizza in hand. "I'm making progress," I replied, careful not to mention my automation script. "About halfway through my section." He frowned. "Only halfway? Anderson and Liu are already 3/4 done with theirs." He glanced at my screen. "What's that you're working on? That doesn't look like the Henderson data template." I quickly minimized my script window. "Just double-checking some formulas." David's eyes narrowed. "Focus, Amber. We don't have time for your little side projects. This is why you're still in a junior position while people hired after you have been promoted." The comment stung, but I kept my expression neutral. "Understood." As he walked away, I heard him mutter to the team lead, "Some people just don't have what it takes to succeed in this industry." By 9 p.m., my colleagues looked dead on their feet. The office was quiet, except for the clicking of keyboards and occasional sighs of frustration. David had retreated to his office but emerged every 30 minutes to check on our progress and remind us of the impending deadline. I took a deep breath and pulled up my script again. It wasn't perfect, but it might work. While everyone was focused on their own screens, I quietly ran a test on a small batch of the Henderson data. It worked. The script processed in seconds what would have taken me half an hour to do manually. I sat back, heart racing. Should I tell everyone? David had already made it clear he thought I was underperforming. What if the script failed on the larger data set? What if it introduced errors I hadn't anticipated? As I debated with myself, David emerged from his office again, looking even more frazzled. Status update, everyone! The team called out their completion percentages, mostly around 70–80%. When it came to me, I hesitated. Still at 50%, David. But nothing, he cut me off. Everyone else is nearly finished, and you're dragging behind as usual. This is exactly why I've been reluctant to assign you to important clients. The conference room fell silent. All eyes were on me, some sympathetic, others avoiding contact altogether. I felt heat rising to my face. Actually, I said, surprising myself with my steady voice, I've been working on something that might help all of us get home before midnight. David laughed dismissively. Unless you've secretly hired a team of data processors, I doubt that. Not exactly, I replied, turning my laptop screen toward him. I've developed a script that automates the data processing for the Henderson format. I've tested it on a small batch, and it works perfectly. The silence in the room deepened. David's expression shifted from dismissive to skeptical. Show me, he demanded. I connected my laptop to the conference room projector and walked through the script, explaining how it identified patterns in the Henderson data, processed it according to our established protocols, and formatted it for the final report. This can't possibly work for the full dataset, David said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Let me demonstrate. I loaded the complete Henderson data file, thousands of entries that would have taken us all night to process manually, and ran the script. The room watched in silence as the progress bar moved across the screen. 3 minutes later, it finished. The entire dataset, processed, analyzed, and formatted according to the client specifications. It's done, I said quietly. All of it. The team erupted in amazed exclamations and questions. David stood frozen, staring at the screen. How long have you been working on this? He finally asked. About 2 weeks, in between regular tasks, I answered. I noticed how repetitive the Henderson data processing was and thought there had to be a better way. David's face was unreadable. Everyone verify your sections against what the script produced. If there are no errors, I suppose we can call it a night. As my colleagues eagerly compared their manually processed sections with the script's output, finding everything in perfect order, I couldn't help but notice David's glances in my direction. They weren't appreciative, they were calculating. By 10 p.m., the office had cleared out, everyone grateful to go home. I was packing up my laptop when David approached my desk. That was unexpected, he said, his tone difficult to interpret. But don't think this changes anything about your performance reviews. One clever script doesn't make up for months of mediocrity. I nodded, too tired to argue, watching as he walked away. But as I left the building and stepped into the cool Seattle night, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time since joining TechVision, I felt a sense of power. I had shown what I was capable of, not by working overtime until exhaustion, but by working smarter. And despite David's dismissal, something had changed. I could feel it. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find an email from Robert Henderson himself, the CEO of Henderson Global, praising the impressive turnaround on their quarterly report. The message had been sent to David but copied to the entire team and several executives at our company. I couldn't help but notice that David hadn't responded yet. Your script is the office hero, Priya said, rolling her chair over to my desk. Everyone's talking about it. Really? I hadn't expected this level of attention. Are you kidding? We all got to go home instead of staying until 2 a.m. Anderson told me he made it to his daughter's recital after all. You basically saved his marriage. She laughed, but I could tell she wasn't entirely joking. My computer dinged with a meeting invitation from Sandra Reynolds, the company's director of operations. The subject line read, Automation Initiatives Discussion. Looks like the higher-ups noticed, Priya whispered, peering at my screen. That's a good thing, right? I hope so, I replied, though uncertainty gnawed at me. In my experience, attention from upper management was a double-edged sword. The meeting was scheduled for 11 a.m. I spent the morning anxiously reviewing my script, polishing its documentation, and preparing to explain my process. David was notably absent from his office. At precisely 11, I knocked on the door to Sandra's corner office. "Come in, Amber," she called. I was surprised to find not just Sandra, but also Michael Chen, the Chief Technology Officer, and David, who avoided eye contact with me as I entered. "Please have a seat." Sandra gestured to the empty chair. In her mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, Sandra had a reputation for being tough, but fair. "We've been hearing about your automation script that saved the Henderson report." "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It was just something I developed to streamline the data processing." "Just something?" Michael leaned forward, his interest evident. "From what I understand, you single-handedly automated a process that was taking our entire team hours of manual labor." David cleared his throat. "While the script was certainly helpful in this instance, I should point out that Amber developed it on company time without authorization, possibly neglecting her assigned duties." The accusation hung in the air. Sandra's expression remained neutral, but I noticed Michael's eyebrows raise slightly. "Actually," I countered, gathering my courage, "I developed most of it during lunch breaks and after hours, and I kept up with all my assigned tasks." Sandra looked at David. "Is that true? Has Amber's performance on her regular duties been satisfactory?" David shifted uncomfortably. "Her work has been adequate, though not exceptional." "Interesting," Sandra said, "because I reviewed her performance metrics this morning, and they're consistently above average for her team." The room fell silent. I fought to keep my expression neutral, though inside I was reeling. Sandra had checked my performance metrics. "The reason we called you in," Michael said, breaking the tension, "is that we're very interested in your approach to automation. This kind of initiative is exactly what TechVision needs to stay competitive. We'd like you to walk us through your script," Sandra added, "and discuss the possibility of implementing similar automation for other clients." For the next 30 minutes, I demonstrated my script, explained my methodology, and answered their questions. David remained mostly silent, occasionally interjecting with concerns about potential risks and quality control issues that might arise from automation. "These are valid considerations," Michael acknowledged, "but the potential efficiency gains are too significant to ignore." He turned to me. "Amber, would you be interested in heading up a small task force to identify other processes that could benefit from similar automation?" I blinked in surprise. Yes, absolutely." "Excellent," Sandra said, making a note. "We'll assign you a team of 3 developers to start with. David, you'll need to redistribute Amber's current workload." David's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "With all due respect, Sandra, I'm not sure Amber has the leadership experience for this role. Perhaps she could work under Anderson or Liu." "Actually," Sandra interrupted, "I think fresh perspectives are exactly what we need here. Amber has demonstrated both technical skill and innovative thinking." She smiled at me. "Sometimes the best ideas come from those who aren't constrained by how things have always been done." As the meeting concluded, I felt lightheaded with disbelief. I had walked in expecting at best a pat on the back, and at worst, a reprimand for going outside my assigned duties. Instead, I was walking out with my own project team. "Amber," Sandra called as I reached the door. "One more thing. The automation task force will report directly to me and Michael. We want to give you the freedom to explore solutions without additional layers of management." The implication was clear. I nodded, unable to suppress a small smile as I left the office. David caught up with me in the hallway, his expression thunderous. "Don't think this makes you untouchable," he hissed, keeping his voice low. "You went over my head with that script, and now you're taking resources from my team." "I didn't go over your head," I replied calmly. "I created a solution to a problem, and it worked. That's all." "Just remember who does your performance reviews," he said. "This little task force might not last past the quarter." As he stalked away, I should have felt intimidated. Instead, I felt something unexpected: pity. David saw innovation as a threat rather than an opportunity. And for the first time, I understood that his criticism of me had never really been about my performance. When I returned to my desk, a crowd of colleagues was waiting, eager for details. Word had spread quickly about my meeting with the executives. "So?" Priya prompted. "Are you in trouble or getting promoted?" "Neither. Or maybe both." I laughed. "They're giving me a team to develop more automation tools for the company." The news was met with congratulations and questions. Even colleagues I rarely spoke with stopped by to express their interest in the project. By the end of the day, my inbox was flooded with emails from people across different departments, suggesting processes that could benefit from automation. As I packed up to leave, exactly at 5 p.m., I noticed David watching me from his office. Normally, I would have felt guilty about leaving on time, while others stayed late. But today, I smiled and waved goodbye. Working smarter, not longer. That was going to be my new mantra. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Sandra had assigned me 3 developers: Priya, Marcus from the back-end team, and Rachel, a recent hire with a background in machine learning. We were given a small conference room to use as our project space, which we quickly covered with flowcharts, process diagrams, and to-do lists. Our first task was to identify the most time-consuming manual processes across the company. We sent out surveys, conducted interviews, and analyzed workflow data. The results were eye-opening. Employees across all departments were spending hours on repetitive tasks that could potentially be automated. "Look at this," Rachel said during our 3rd week, pointing to a particularly striking statistic. "The accounting team spends an average of 20 hours per week just reconciling invoices against purchase orders. And the customer service department manually enters complaint data into 3 different systems," Marcus added. "That's pure redundancy." "Let's prioritize based on potential time savings," I suggested. "We can develop proofs of concept for the top 3 processes and present them to Sandra and Michael next month." The team agreed, and we divided the work. Priya and I would tackle the accounting reconciliation, while Marcus and Rachel would work on the customer service system integration and an automated report generator for the marketing team. Our little automation task force quickly became known throughout the company. People would stop by our project room to offer suggestions or ask about our progress. We even started a weekly automation hour, where employees could bring their most tedious tasks for us to evaluate. Not everyone was supportive, of course. David had taken to referring to us as the hobby club and questioned the resources being diverted from regular client work. But with Sandra's backing, his criticism held little weight. One Tuesday morning, about 6 weeks into our project, Sandra and Michael stopped by for an informal progress update. "We've completed the first phase of the accounting reconciliation automation," I explained, demonstrating the system we'd built. "Initial tests show it reduces the processing time by 78%. "That's impressive," Michael said, watching as the system matched invoices to purchase orders in seconds. "What about accuracy?" "We've run it against historical data from the past 6 months, Priya jumped in. "It caught 3 discrepancies that the manual process had missed." Sandra nodded approvingly. "And the other projects?" We walked them through our progress on the customer service integration and the marketing report generator. Both were still in development, but showing promising results. "This is exactly the kind of innovation we've been looking for," Sandra said as the demonstration concluded. "I'd like to fast-track the accounting system for company-wide implementation. How soon can it be ready?" I glanced at Priya. 2 weeks for a full rollout, including training for the accounting team." "Perfect, and I have another project for you to consider." Sandra pulled out her tablet. Henderson Global was so impressed with the efficiency of their last report, that they've asked about other processes we might be able to streamline for them. My heart skipped a beat. Henderson was our biggest client, and they were asking for our automation expertise specifically. They've invited us to present at their quarterly strategy meeting next month, Sandra continued. I'd like your team to develop a comprehensive automation proposal for their supply chain analytics. That's a huge opportunity, I stammered, mind already racing with possibilities. It is, Michael agreed. And potentially a new service line for TechVision. Automation as a service has a nice ring to it, don't you think? After they left, the four of us sat in stunned silence for a moment. Did that just happen? Rachel finally asked. Are we presenting to Henderson Global? Apparently so, I said, still processing the implications. We need to start researching their supply chain immediately. As we dove into planning, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in just a few weeks. From being dismissed as mediocre by David, I was now leading a team that was potentially creating a new service offering for the company. The next day, I arrived at the office to find David waiting by my desk. I hear you're presenting to Henderson next month, he said without preamble. That's right, I replied, setting down my coffee. Sandra asked us to prepare an automation proposal for their supply chain. His expression was unreadable. Henderson is my client. I've been managing that relationship for 5 years. I know that, I said carefully. We're just focusing on the automation aspect, which should be under my supervision, he interrupted. I've sent a proposal to Sandra suggesting that your team be placed under my department for the Henderson presentation. I felt a flash of anger but kept my voice level. Did she approve it? Not yet, he admitted. But it makes organizational sense. I know Henderson better than anyone at this company. Then we'd welcome your insights, I said, choosing my words deliberately. But our team reports to Sandra and Michael. That structure seems to be working well. David's jaw tightened. You've been very lucky, Amber. One clever script and suddenly you're leading a special project. But novelty wears off quickly in this business. As he walked away, I noticed several colleagues pretending not to have overheard our conversation. Priya caught my eye from across the room and gave me a thumbs-up gesture. That afternoon, I received an email from Sandra. Amber, I've reviewed David's proposal to integrate your team into his department. While I appreciate his concern for the Henderson relationship, I believe the automation initiative benefits from its current independent structure. However, I've asked David to serve as a consultant for your Henderson presentation to ensure we leverage his client knowledge. Please schedule time with him this week. Sandra. It was a diplomatic solution that gave David a role while maintaining our team's autonomy. I forwarded the email to my team with a note to incorporate a meeting with David into our schedule. The next few weeks were a blur of development, testing, and preparation. We created a detailed proposal for Henderson's supply chain automation, building on our successful projects within TechVision. David provided input during our consultation meetings, some of which was genuinely valuable, though often delivered with thinly veiled condescension. The night before the Henderson presentation, I stayed late, reviewing our slides and rehearsing my talking points. The office was quiet, most employees having left hours ago. I was surprised when Sandra appeared at the door of our project room. Working late? She asked, stepping inside. Just making sure everything's perfect for tomorrow, I replied. She nodded, taking a seat across from me. You know, when Michael first showed me your Henderson script, I was impressed by the code. But what really caught my attention was the initiative behind it. I looked up from my laptop. What do you mean? You saw a problem and solved it. Not because anyone asked you to, but because you knew there was a better way. She smiled. That's rare, Amber. Most people just follow the established process, even when it's inefficient. Thank you, I said, surprised by her candor. Though not everyone appreciated my initiative. You mean David? It wasn't a question. David is excellent at maintaining client relationships and delivering consistent results, but he's resistant to change, and in today's technology landscape, that's a liability. I wasn't sure how to respond to such a frank assessment of my former manager. The company is evolving, Sandra continued. We need people who can think beyond current limitations and imagine new possibilities. She stood to leave. Get some rest. Tomorrow is a big day. As she reached the door, she turned back. Oh, and after the Henderson meeting, I'd like to discuss your role moving forward. This automation initiative has outgrown its task force status. Long after she left, I sat processing her words. Tomorrow wasn't just about presenting an automation proposal to Henderson. It was about the future direction of TechVision, and apparently, my future role in it. The Henderson Global Headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in downtown Seattle. Our team arrived an hour early for our presentation, setting up in the imposing boardroom with its panoramic views of Puget Sound. Nervous? Priya asked as we arranged our materials. Terrified, I admitted. But excited too. David arrived shortly after, impeccably dressed and carrying an expensive leather portfolio. He nodded curtly to our team and engaged Sandra and Michael in conversation near the window. At precisely 10 a.m., the Henderson executives filed in. Robert Henderson himself, his COO, CTO, and several VPs. Introductions were made, coffee was served, and the meeting began. Sandra opened with an overview of TechVision's evolving services, positioning automation as the next frontier in business efficiency. Then she introduced me. Amber Davies leads our automation initiative. What began as an innovative solution for Henderson's quarterly reporting has expanded into a company-wide transformation of how we approach data processing and analysis. As I stood to present, I caught David's expression, a mixture of resignation and resentment. But I pushed that observation aside and focused on the task at hand. Thank you, Sandra. And thank you to the Henderson team for this opportunity. I took a deep breath. Today, we're going to show you how automation can transform your supply chain analytics from a time-consuming retrospective process into a real-time strategic advantage. For the next 40 minutes, our team walked through our proposal, demonstrating how our automated systems could integrate with Henderson's existing infrastructure to provide continuous supply chain optimization. We showed simulations, cost-benefit analyses, and implementation timelines. The Henderson executives were engaged, asking detailed questions that we'd anticipated and prepared for. Even David contributed positively, lending his knowledge of Henderson's business model to reinforce key points. What impresses me most, Robert Henderson said as we concluded, is how you've approached this from a business perspective, not just a technical one. You understand that technology should serve strategy, not dictate it. Exactly, I agreed. Automation isn't about replacing human judgment. It's about freeing people from routine tasks so they can focus on higher-level decision-making. Well said. Henderson turned to his team. I think we've seen enough to move forward. Sandra, Michael, we'd like to proceed with the pilot program as outlined. After handshakes and promises of follow-up meetings, we packed up our materials. The mood was jubilant as we headed back to TechVision. That, Michael announced in the elevator, was a home run. Henderson has approved the largest consulting engagement in our company's history. Congratulations flowed, and even David managed a reluctant, "Good presentation." Back at the office, news of our success spread quickly. The automation team was celebrated with an impromptu gathering in the break room, complete with hastily ordered champagne and cupcakes. As the celebration wound down, Sandra pulled me aside. My office in 15 minutes? I nodded, both excited and nervous about what she might want to discuss. When I arrived at her office, I was surprised to find not just Sandra, but also Michael and Vivian Zhao, the company's HR director. "Have a seat, Amber," Sandra said, her expression giving nothing away. "First, let me reiterate how impressed we are with your work on the automation initiative and today's Henderson presentation." "Thank you," I replied, wondering where this was heading. Michael leaned forward. "We've been discussing the future of automation at TechVision, and we've come to a decision. We're establishing a new department, Business Process Automation." My heart raced as I began to understand the implications. "We'd like you to head this department as Director of Business Process Automation," Sandra continued. "You'll report directly to Michael and have a team of 12 to start, including your current group and additional hires. I sat in stunned silence. This would be a significant promotion, Vivian added, with corresponding adjustments to your compensation package, of course. I don't know what to say, I finally managed. Say yes, Michael suggested with a smile. Yes, I said, laughing with disbelief. Absolutely yes. The details were discussed. My new responsibilities, the department's objectives, the transition timeline. By the time I left Sandra's office an hour later, my head was spinning with the magnitude of the opportunity. As I walked back to my desk, I passed David's office. He was sitting alone, staring at his computer screen, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I considered stopping to tell him about my promotion, but something held me back. He would find out soon enough. Instead, I returned to our project room, where Priya, Marcus, and Rachel were still celebrating our successful presentation. There she is, Priya exclaimed. The automation queen herself, I laughed, taking the paper cup of champagne they offered. I have news, I said, unable to contain my excitement. Big news. As I shared the details of my new role and the expansion of our team into a full department, their reactions ranged from excited congratulations to good-natured demands for promotions of their own. You're all coming with me, I assured them. I'm going to need deputies I can trust. Later that evening, as the office emptied and the excitement of the day began to fade, I found myself alone in our project room, looking at the flowcharts and diagrams that had led to this unexpected turning point in my career. My phone buzzed with a text from Priya. Director Davies, still processing. So proud of you. Drinks this weekend to celebrate? I smiled, typing back my agreement. As I gathered my things to leave, I noticed David standing in the doorway. Congratulations on your promotion, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Thank you, I replied, surprised by his initiative. He hesitated, then stepped into the room. I underestimated you. And your script. It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get. We all have different strengths, I said diplomatically. Your client relationships were crucial to today's success. He nodded, seeming to appreciate the acknowledgement. I hear you'll be hiring for your new department. Yes, we're expanding quite a bit. My nephew is graduating with a computer science degree next month. Smart kid, good with code. He paused. I'd appreciate it if you'd consider his resume. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. David Winters asking me for a favor. Have him send it to me directly, I said. I'll make sure it gets fair consideration. He thanked me and left. Our dynamic irrevocably altered. As I walked out of the building into the cool Seattle evening, I reflected on the journey of the past few months. From being called useless for not working overtime to becoming a department director, all because I'd chosen to solve a problem creatively rather than simply putting in more hours. The rain had stopped, and the setting sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the wet streets. I took a moment to appreciate the view before heading home, already mentally drafting plans for my new department. Working smarter, not longer. It had started as a personal philosophy, become a team mantra, and was now poised to transform an entire company. And it had all begun with a simple script that automated a tedious task and changed everything.